Welcome to Revenge and Justice, where betrayal finally meets its reckoning. We share powerful first-person stories of men who were underestimated, betrayed, and pushed too far by family business partners and the people they trusted most. If you believe respect must be earned and betrayal always has a price, you've found your home. And now, today's story. My daughter handed me a brass plaque at my company's 25th anniversary. 4 minutes later, in front of 120 guests, my son-in-law slid a one-page document across the table and asked me to sign. I read every line. One of them said, "Don't expect me to take care of you in old age." I signed it anyway. Then I turned to the next table and asked the notary if I could borrow her stamp. Nobody in that room knew my name was the only thing holding up a $600,000 bond. So I took it back. 22 men who had done nothing wrong found out first. But I am going to tell it in the order it happened, because the order is the whole thing. I got to the hall at 5 o'clock to set up the chairs. Nobody asked me to. I had been setting up those chairs for 25 years at the Christmas party and the retirement suppers and the one funeral we all went to together, and it did not occur to me that this time I was a guest. Nolan Torres found me at it and took the other end of the table without saying anything the way he has since he was 22 years old. By 7, the back hall of the Slovak home was full. 120 people, most of them mine. Men I had taught to sweat a joint, and their wives and their kids running between the folding chairs in church shoes. Nasir Carrillo brought a pan of his wife's pork and rice and put it at the end of the buffet without being asked, the way he does. Dominic Nicholson came down from the Union Hall in a jacket he only wears twice a year. My daughter Holland ran the program. She always ran the program. She had a stack of index cards she did not need and a microphone she did not need either, because Holland has never once in her life had to raise her voice to be listened to. She talked for 7 minutes about 25 years of integrity. She used the word integrity 4 times, and every time she used it, the room got a little quieter, the way a room does when people are being told something they already believe. Then Nolan took the microphone and told the one about 1994. The Faulkner job, the 6-inch line in a crawl space you could not turn around in, and me going in on my back at 2 in the morning with a mirror and a stub wrench because the second shift was going to lose the whole pour if we did not find the leak. He left out the part where I came out and threw up in the gravel. Everybody laughed. It is a good story, and it is even mostly true. Macy Meza went by with a tray of glasses while he was talking. She had her laptop open on the service counter to keep the slideshow running, and the screensaver had come up on it, the one with our name across the middle in the same block letters we put on the trucks. She turned it off and turned it back on again so the picture would come back. I remember thinking she was the only person in the building doing actual work. I watched Dominic Nicholson come down the side of the room during the laugh. He shook my hand. He shook Nolan's hand. He put his hand on Nasir Carrillo's shoulder and said something that made Nasir look at the floor. My son-in-law Lucian was standing right there with his hand already out, and Dominic went past it like it was a coat rack and kept going and sat down. I filed that away and then I forgot about it for 11 days. Holland called me up. She said the word founder, and everybody stood, and I walked to the front of a room full of people who had spent their working lives inside walls nobody would ever open again. She gave me the plaque with both hands. It was heavier than it looked. That is the first honest thing I can tell you about that night. I did not read it up there. You do not read a gift in front of the person who gave it to you. I said thank you in about 9 words, and I sat back down at the head table and turned it over under the light the way you turn over any piece of finished work to see if the edges were clean. The engraving said, Founder. Under that, it said 2000, then a dash, then 2022. A dash between 2 years is not a range. I have been to enough funerals in this town to know exactly what a dash between 2 years is. Somebody had ordered it, and somebody had proofed it, and somebody had paid for it, and not one of those people had stopped at the little horizontal line in the middle and thought about what it does to a man's name when you put a second number after it. I did not say anything. I want to be clear about that because everything that comes later depends on it. I sat at the head table with my thumb over the dash and I did the arithmetic on what saying it out loud would cost. 120 people, half of them on my payroll. Every one of them would have had to pick a side before the coffee came out. So I laid the plaque face down on the tablecloth and left my hand on it. Across the room, my granddaughter Violet was watching me 14 years old with a pair of my old welding goggles hanging off her belt loop because she thinks nobody notices. She noticed. She is the only one who did. 4 minutes later, my son-in-law stood up with a piece of paper. Lucian Medina does everything left-handed. I had watched him do it for 14 years without ever once thinking about it the way you stop hearing a compressor that runs all day. He stood up while the room was still settling, and he had the paper in his left hand, and he crossed behind my daughter's chair to get to my side of the table because a left-handed man will always come at you from that side. He did not use the microphone. That was the thing that told me it was not a speech. He leaned down over my shoulder like a waiter, and he set 2 copies on the tablecloth in front of me, and he said, "Mr. Fisher, whenever you have a minute." He has called me Mr. Fisher since the day he married my daughter. I have asked him twice to stop. The heading said, Transition and Founder Care Plan. Underneath that it said, Prepared for Mac Fisher, and then the date. I got my reading glasses out of my shirt pocket. I have a habit I picked up in the trade and never lost, which is that I count the numbered items before I read any of them, because a man ought to know how deep the water is before he steps in. There were 7. The first 3 were fine. Better than fine. Clause 1 moved my company vehicle to the fleet policy and saved about $400 a year. Clause 2 set up a consulting stipend so I would keep getting a check. Clause 3 carried my health coverage until Medicare picked it up in full. Whatever else I am going to tell you about my son-in-law, understand this first. The man is good at his work. Clause 4 rebranded the company. It did not say to what. It said the legal name would be updated in the first quarter to reflect current ownership and leadership. That is 11 words doing the work of one, and the one is erase. Clause 5 asked me to convert the Elyria Avenue lease. The shop and the yard sit on 2.5 acres I bought in 1999 with money from a settlement on a bad back, and the company has rented it from me month to month ever since on a 1-page agreement my wife typed. Clause 5 proposed a 20-year term at a fixed rate or an outright purchase at appraised value, whichever the board preferred. Somebody had pulled the deed to write that sentence. Somebody had read it and had still not understood what it said. Clause 6 was a paragraph about a place in Avon Lake. Assisted living 22 minutes from the shop with a brochure folded into the back of the packet so the picture of the sunroom was the first thing you saw when you turned the page. They had thought about which way the paper would fall open. Somebody had. Clause 7 was not written by Lucian. I knew that before I finished the first line because the numbered items above it were flat and careful, and this one had my daughter's rhythm in it, the same rhythm she used to use in the notes she left on the kitchen table when she was in high school. It was headed Family Statement. 4 sentences. The last one said, Don't expect me to take care of you in old age. I read it twice. I want to be careful here because I have signed a few thousand drawings in my life and I know exactly what my hand does. It did not shake. It went slow. Not from hurt. It went slow because I was already counting something else, which was how many more signatures it was going to take to finish this and whose they would have to be. I signed Clause 7's copy at the bottom where the little X was, and I slid it back across the tablecloth with 2 fingers. Lucian picked it up. He said thank you, and he meant it, and that is not a figure of speech. The room let out a breath. Somebody at the second table started clapping, and about 30 other people joined in before they worked out that they did not know what they were clapping for. I looked at my daughter while they were clapping. She was not looking at me. She had her chin up and she was going table to table with her eyes. And I knew that look because I taught it to her at 14 on a job site in Amherst when I told her that the way you find out if a crew is with you is that you count the hands. She was counting the hands. She got all the way around the room, and when she was done, she brought her eyes back to the front, and she smiled at nobody in particular, And that was the whole of what my daughter did, while the room applauded a piece of paper she had written. Violet did not clap. She was standing by the coffee urn with her arms down at her sides, and she was looking at the tablecloth where the paper had been. Justice Stewart was 2 tables over. She was my wife's friend for 29 years, and she has been a notary in this county for longer than that, and she carries the stamp in her purse to weddings and funerals and parties. She used to tell Eliana, you never know when somebody is going to need something made real. I got up and walked over and asked if she still did. She had it out of her purse before I finished the sentence. I brought it back to the head table, and I put my own copy flat under the lamp, and she pressed the seal into the corner and wrote the date in her small square hand, and she asked me no questions at all, which is the only reason I chose her. 2 or 3 people watched us do it. Not one of them understood why a man would take the trouble to certify a copy of a paper he had just agreed to. I put the plaque in the bed of the truck instead of on the seat. There was no reason for it. A man who has hauled cast iron for 47 years does not think a piece of brass is going to hurt his upholstery. But I set it back there face down on the rib steel and drove the 11 blocks home with it sliding around behind me, and every time it moved I heard it. The kitchen light was the one Eliana liked, the low one over the sink, and it was still on the timer she set 6 years ago because I have never gotten around to changing it. On the sill above the faucet, there is a dented Stegmaier beer tin with a lid that does not quite seat anymore. I did not open it. I mention it only because I walked past it and because later on it matters. I went down the basement stairs and turned on the lamp over the bench. That bench came out of my father's garage in 1979, and it has a burn scar on the left corner shaped like the state of Michigan. In the vise at the end of it, where it has sat for a very long time, is a 24-inch pipe wrench. I did not go down there for the wrench. I went down there for a blue folder in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the drawer that sticks in August and opens fine the rest of the year. There were 3 things in it. I laid all 3 out under the lamp because I wanted to see them next to each other, which I had not done since the day I put them in there. The first one was a registration with the state of Ohio. It named the licensed individual under whom Fisher Mechanical was permitted to hold a mechanical contractor license, and the licensed individual was me. Not the company, me. In this state, a company does not get a license, a person does, and then the company borrows him. I had signed that registration in 2000, and I had never once taken my name off it, and in 25 years, not one person had ever asked me why. The second one was an indemnity agreement with the surety company. When you bid public work, you post a bond, and the bond on the high school job was $600,000, and somewhere in the middle of the second page is a line where a natural person guarantees it personally. That was me too. If the work went bad, the surety did not come after the company first, it came after the man who signed. The third one was the deed to 2.5 acres on Elyria Avenue, with a shop and a yard on it, bought in 1999. Never transferred, never contributed, never put into the company. Rented to Fisher Mechanical on the 1-page agreement my wife typed in an afternoon. Month to month, 30 days notice either way. I sat on the stool and looked at the 3 of them for a while. My daughter had spent a year and a half taking my name off letterhead, off the trucks, off the front of the building, off the top of every proposal that went out the door. Nobody had taken it off these. You cannot take it off these. These are the 3 places where a name is not decoration. Then I looked over at the vise. The wrench in it is a rigid 24, older than I am, with a handle so worn the knurling is gone smooth in the middle where a hand goes. Cut into the flat of that handle in letters about a 1/4 inch tall is the name Walter Fisher. My father worked 39 years for an outfit on the east side that put steam in half the schools in this county. He died in '78 at 61 on a Tuesday at the shop. The paper ran 4 lines. The company sent a wreath and called him a long-time employee, and that phrase is the entire estate. I went down there the next week to get his tools, and a man I had known since I was 9 years old explained to me kindly that tools issued to a man are the property of the company. I did not argue. I have never been much good at arguing. I picked one wrench up off the bench, and I carried it out past him, and he let me because his name was on it, and because nobody wanted to spend an afternoon filing it off. I called Dion Woods at 20 minutes to midnight. He has been my lawyer for 40 years and my friend for a little longer than that, and he did not ask why I was calling at that hour, and he did not ask what was wrong. He said my office 8:30 and hung up. Dion talks the way other people write telegrams. His office is on the second floor of a bank that has not been a bank since the 70s on Broadway, up a staircase with a brass rail and a smell of paper that has been sitting in the same room since before either of us was born. Dion does not shake hands. He never has. He came around the desk with a glass of water and set it down in front of me and sat. And he waited while I put the folder on the blotter and turned it toward him. He opened it. He looked at the first page for about as long as it takes to read a street sign. Then he closed the folder again and put both hands flat on top of it and looked at me over his glasses. "Do you understand he said what you have been carrying around in a drawer for 25 years? I told him I understood it the way a man understands the breaker panel in his own basement. I know which switch kills the kitchen. I have never once stood there and thought about what happens to the whole street if I pull the wrong one." Dion did not answer that. He got out a pad of graph paper and a mechanical pencil and squared the pad up with the edge of the blotter, and then he started drawing boxes. He is not a man who explains a thing out loud if he can put it on paper, because on paper you cannot interrupt him. The first box was me. He wrote withdrawal of qualifier and drew an arrow down. The second box was the state. He said the form is 2 pages. It goes to Columbus, and the licensed individual does not have to give a reason, and nobody gets to talk him out of it, and there is no waiting period, because the whole point of the rule is to protect the public from a company operating without a qualified person behind it. He said the license does not get revoked. It gets suspended automatically, and the suspension posts to the public database inside 1 business day. The third box was the permits. Every open job we had was running on a permit pulled under that license number. 22 of them from the high school all the way down to a boiler swap at a church on 28th Street. When the license goes dark, he said, those permits do not become questionable. They become void. There is no such thing as a permit belonging to an unlicensed contractor. The fourth box was a man with a staple gun. Dion drew it as a stick figure, which is the only joke I have ever seen him make on paper. He said that once the database updates, the state inspector for this district is required to go out and post a stop work order on every active site. Required, not asked, not encouraged. She would not be doing it to us. She would be doing her job, and if she did not do it, she would lose hers. The fifth box was Turner Fry. The high school job is a public contract with a general contractor sitting on top of it, and every one of those contracts has a paragraph that says loss of licensure is a default, and default lets him terminate for cause the same afternoon. He does not have to be angry about it. He has a schedule and a bond of his own. The sixth box was the surety. Dion wrote $600,000 inside it and underlined the number twice. He said a termination for cause is exactly the event the bond exists for. They call it. They demand collateral within days, not weeks, and the note at the bank has a covenant in it that says the borrower shall maintain licensure in good standing, which means the line of credit dies the same hour, which means payroll dies with it. He set the pencil down and turned the pad around so it faced me. I looked at it for a while. 6 boxes and 5 arrows, and every arrow going one direction. I had walked in there thinking I had a wrench in my hand. What was on that pad was not a wrench. You do not point a thing like that at a person. You put it under a building. Then Dion did something I did not expect. He slid the graph paper aside and took a different sheet out of the folder in front of him, and this one had not come from me. It was a notice from Local 55, the kind that goes to the hall when a signatory contractor petitions to change a classification. It was dated 3 weeks before the anniversary party. Fisher Mechanical had petitioned to reclassify 6 of our 22 men from journeyman to helper. Not laid off, not let go, reclassified, which in this trade means a man does the same work he did on Friday and finds out on Monday that the work is now worth 31% less. I read the 6 names twice. Then I looked at the bottom of the page. It was signed by Lucian Medina as Chief Financial Officer, and above the signature line there was a second line, an approval line, and my daughter had signed it in the small, clean hand she has had since she was a girl. The effective date was the 1st of January. Dion tapped that with his finger and said so they have not told them yet. Nasir Carrillo was the second name on the list. He has been in the trade 24 years. He taught Nolan Torres to bend soft copper in a parking lot in the rain because Nolan was too proud to ask me. And 2 nights before I sat in that office, Nasir Carrillo carried a pan of his wife's pork and rice into a hall full of people and set it at the end of the buffet, and did not tell anybody it was his. I sat there and I thought about Dominic Nicholson walking past my son-in-law's hand like it was a coat rack. It had taken me 2 days and a piece of paper to understand a thing that a union man had understood well enough to say with his shoulder. I asked Dion who else knew about the petition. He said, nobody. Not the 6, not the hall past the clerk who date-stamped it, not Nolan. He said it the way you read a gauge. And then he waited because he had just handed me the only thing worse than what he had drawn on the graph paper, which was a reason. Dion folded the union notice in half, squared the fold with his thumbnail, and set it face down at the corner of the blotter. He did not tell me what to think about it. In 40 years, he has never once told me what to think about anything, which is the reason I have kept paying him. Then he pulled the deed out from under the other 2 and turned it around. He said you have been looking at the license because that is the part that scares you. Look at this one, because this is the part that is simple. He put his finger on the 3rd paragraph. 2.5 acres, shopyard racks, the pipe threader that is bolted to the slab, the fence, the gate, the gravel, the trucks sit on overnight. All of it standing on ground that belongs to a private individual who rents it to a corporation on a month-to-month agreement his wife typed in 1999. 30 days, he said. Either direction, no cause required. Not a dispute, not a lawsuit, not a judge. A letter. He said one more thing, and then he stopped talking. He said Clause 5 of that plan they handed you asked to convert this lease to a 20-year term or a purchase at appraised value, which means somebody pulled this deed and read it. He tapped the paper twice. They read it as an opportunity. It did not occur to either of them to read it as an exposure. I did not tell him yes, and I did not tell him no. I asked him how long a letter like that takes to write. He said 1 paragraph. The lot behind that building is 9 spaces and a dumpster, and Nolan Torres was standing next to my truck when I came down the stairs. He had a roll of prints under his arm and his hood up because it had started doing the thing it does here in November, which is not rain and not snow and gets into your collar either way. He had not followed me. He had gone by the house, and Macy had told him where I was. And that is how things work in a town this size. He wanted to talk about the school. The basement run on the east side of the building was showing a pressure drop across the new section, and he had chased it for 2 days and could not find it, and he wanted to know if I remembered anything about that building, because I had worked in it in '86 when they put the addition on. I told him to look at the reducer at the elbow by the old Chase, because in '86 the drawings and the building were 2 different buildings, and whoever did that section put a fitting in there that is 1 size off, and it has been 1 size off for 40 years. He wrote it on the back of his hand. He always writes on the back of his hand, and he has never once lost a note. Then he told me about Reese Strong. The kid is 19. He came in as a first year in June, and he cannot cut a straight thread yet, but he shows up 40 minutes early, and he does not sit down. His girl was born on Tuesday. 7 pounds and something. Nolan said the kid brought 2 boxes of donuts to the shop Wednesday morning and stood there while everybody ate them and did not eat one himself because he wanted to watch. Nolan put the prints back under his arm and started for his truck. Then he turned around, the way people do when the real thing occurs to them on the way out. He said, "Boss, do me a favor and do not actually retire." He said it laughing. He said, "What happens to the 22 of us when you finally stop coming around?" He got in his truck and pulled out and gave me 2 fingers off the wheel. I stood in that lot for a while. Then I drove home, and I did not go down to the basement, and I did not eat anything, and I sat in the kitchen with the low light on until it got light outside for real. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I got up and wrote the 6 names on the back of an envelope in order the way they had been on the union notice. I did not need the envelope. I had them the first time I read them. I wrote them down anyway. Then I did nothing for 3 days. I want that on the record because of everything that came after. I had the folder. I had the paragraph. Dion had told me it was 1 paragraph, and for 3 days I fed the birds and paid the gas bill and drove out to the shop and sat in the lot without going in, and if my daughter had called me one time in those 3 days about anything at all, about the weather, about nothing, I do not know what I would have done. That is not a figure of speech. I do not know. On the 4th morning, Dion called at 7. He did not say hello. He said, "Come in." When I got up the stairs, the glass of water was not on the desk. That was the first thing I noticed. He was already standing when I came through the door, and there was a folder in front of the chair I sit in, closed, squared up to the edge of the blotter, and he did not hand it to me, and he did not open it. He said, "Sit down first." I opened the folder myself. He was not going to do it for me, and I would not have wanted him to. It was 18 months of paper, and all of it was the same paper. Letterhead with the name across the top and letterhead with the name gone. A proposal from 2 summers ago that said Fisher Mechanical Incorporated reissued in March with the name shortened to the initials. Certificates of insurance, a vendor invoice for new door decals on 4 trucks, a revised employee handbook where the cover page had been redesigned and the word Fisher appeared exactly 0 times in 91 pages. Dion let me get halfway through. Then he said, "That is not why I called you," and turned to the last 3 pages. The top one was a renewal affidavit. In this state, the qualifier files one every year, sworn, signed under penalty of falsification, attesting that he remains actively engaged with the business. 1 page, 4 lines, and a signature block. It had been filed on the 14th of March. I know what I was doing on the 14th of March. I was at Mercy on 21st Street with a gallbladder that had gone septic and taken my kidneys along with it for the ride. 9 days. 4 of them I have no memory of at all. I could not hold a cup. My daughter sat in that room and read me the sports page out loud, and I could not have told you what sport it was. Dion laid 3 more pages beside it. A permit application from 2019. A change order from 2022. My signature on the back of a check I wrote him for a will he drafted after Eliana died. "Look at the M," he said. My M drops below the line. It has since a man named Kozel taught me to letter on a drawing board and told me a capital that does not break the baseline is a capital nobody trusts. And my K is 2 strokes, not 1, because I broke the middle knuckle on my right hand in '81 on a job in Avon, and it never healed straight, so I lift the pencil where other people do not. The M on the affidavit dropped below the line. The K was 2 strokes. Somebody had studied it. This was not a scrawl on a delivery slip. Somebody had taken my signature and practiced it, and they had gotten one thing wrong. Everything I have ever written leans right uphill, the way you write when you learned on a slanted board. The name on that affidavit stood up straight and then fell the other way at the end just slightly, the way a right-hander cannot make his hand go. Whoever signed that was left-handed. My daughter writes with her right hand. I taught her at the kitchen table on Reed Avenue with her sitting on 2 phone books, and she was 6, and she cried about the letter G for most of a winter. Dion asked me what I wanted to do. I told him to draw the withdrawal. He had it in the drawer already. He filled it out while I sat there and turned it around, and I signed it in the box. Then I told him to leave the date line empty and put it in his safe. He looked up. He said, "This only does something on the day it gets filed." I know, I said. He said, "And what are you waiting for?" I said I want her to have a door. Dion took his glasses off, which is the closest that man comes to raising his voice. He said a door only works if the person knows it is there. "Are you going to tell her?" I said no. And he said, "Then it is not a door, Mac, it is a test." And I said, "I know what it is." Then he put the form in the safe and spun the dial. The second thing took longer. It was for Violet. tuition at the county joint vocational school through the end of the program, and a separate line for a first-year tool allowance, which is about $1,100, and is the thing that quietly ends more trade careers than anything else. The body of it opens when she turns 25 on two conditions. She has to be working, and she has to be holding a card. It was executed on the 14th of November. Dion capped his pen and asked if I was going to tell the girl. I said no to that too. He did not ask me twice. He has known me long enough to know that I only say no to the same question once, and that this is not a virtue. That night, I went down to the basement and took the wrench out of the vise. The kerosene is in a coffee can under the bench. I put a shop rag over my knee and worked the jaw back and forth with my thumb until the grit came loose, and I got into the knurling with a brush, and then I did the flat of the handle where the letters are, and then I did the parts that were not dirty. The lamp buzzes. It has buzzed since '79. Somewhere in there I remembered that my father used to hold this thing with his thumb flat over the name, covering it every single time, and that I never once asked him why. 40 minutes. Then I put it back in the vise and turned off the lamp. I did not know who had done it. I want to be honest about how little I had. One page, one wrong lean, and a woman reading me the sports page in a room I do not remember. But I went up those stairs knowing one thing all the way down to the floor. It was not her. I was not there for this part. Macy Meza told it to me almost a year later, in the shop, sitting on an upturned bucket with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand. And she told it in order and without leaving anything out, because that is how she does everything. She was there because Lucian asked her to come. He needed the branding proofs printed, and he needed the payroll file, and Macy is the one who keeps both. So she drove out to Crocker Park in Westlake on a Tuesday evening and parked in a garage that cost more than her lunch. She said the strange part was that once she got there, nobody spoke to her for 2 hours. She sat at the end of the table with her laptop open and a folder squared in front of her, and they talked across her the way you talk across a filing cabinet. Nobody ordered food. My daughter had coffee and my son-in-law had a glass of something, and the waiter came by 4 times and gave up. Macy said the place had music playing that had no words in it, and that everything in the room was the color of oatmeal, and that she could not get warm. Lucian went first. He laid out 3 proofs. Macy had printed them that afternoon, and she had known what they were before he opened his mouth because she had watched the file names go by on the print queue. The first one was a word mark in a heavy square typeface. The second one was the same thing in blue with a slash through the counter of the letter M. The third one had a little emblem that Macy said looked like a pipe fitting, drawn by somebody who had never touched one. None of the 3 had the name Fisher on them anywhere. My daughter picked the second one in about 90 seconds. She did not say it was good. She said it would read at highway speed on a truck door, which is exactly the right question to ask, and it is a question I taught her to ask. Then Lucian turned the laptop around. He had a trademark search up. Macy could see the screen because she was sitting where she was sitting at the end, and she said the 2 of them were both looking at the same 3 words. The state registry and the federal registry for the class that covers mechanical contracting, both of them clear, and 1 word across the top of the results in a green box. Availability. The name in the search field was Medina Mechanical. Macy says my daughter did not move for 2 seconds. She is precise about that number. She says she counted it because she was looking at the same screen and she did not know what to do with her face. Then Holland said later. Just that. Later. And she pulled the payroll folder over in front of her and went to the next item on the list, and Lucian closed the laptop without any expression at all and went to the next item too. The next items were money. A deposit at a private school out east of Cleveland because Violet had been accepted for the following fall and the deposit was due in January. A property on a lake in the Poconos that they had walked through twice. Furniture for a house they did not own yet. Then Lucian put his finger on the last line on the payroll sheet and said the operating account covered 3 more weeks. Macy had prepared that sheet. She had also on her own put a second line underneath it, showing what 3 weeks meant if the December progress payment from the school district came in late, the way December payments do. Nobody read the second line. Nobody asked her about it, and she did not volunteer it, and she told me she has thought about that quite a bit since. My daughter did not look worried. She said the first draw on the high school job posts on the 15th. She said it the way you say a thing that has already happened. At some point in there, my daughter's phone lit up face up on the table, and Macy could see it from where she sat, and it was Violet. The message said, "Does Grandpa really have to move?" Macy watched my daughter pick up the phone and start typing. Then stop. Then start. She had her thumb on the screen and her other hand flat on the payroll sheet, and she sat like that while Lucian talked about the lake house, and Macy said she looked at the clock on her laptop when it started, because she felt bad watching and needed somewhere else to put her eyes, and she looked again when Holland finally put the phone down. 11 minutes, 4 words. Macy saw them go out. It said nobody is moving anywhere. That was the end of it, more or less. Lucian put the proofs back in the folder and slid it to Macy without looking at her. Then he said one more thing on his way to standing up, the way you mentioned that you already took the trash out. He said he had the file ready for the bank, everything they would want if there was a question about continuity of management. Personal guarantees, the license history, the corporate consents. He said in case your father decides to make this difficult. My daughter said, "Since when?" And he did not answer her. He raised his hand for the check, and he did not answer her, and Macy said that was the only question asked at that table all night that nobody wrote down. My daughter came to Thanksgiving with a pre-cooked turkey and a roll of painter's tape. I noticed the tape first. 19 days went by between that dinner in Westlake and that Thursday, and from the outside, I did not do one single thing in any of them. I fed the birds, I put the snow tires on, I went to the shop twice and stood in the yard and left. There is one thing I did in those 19 days that I am not going to tell you about yet. I will tell you on the day they found out because that is the day it turned into something, and telling it early would only make me look like a man who had a plan, and I want to be careful about that. They got to the house at 11 in the morning. Violet came up the walk first with a pie her mother had bought, holding it flat with both hands, the way you carry something you have been told twice not to drop. I had set the table myself. Eliana used to do a thing with the good plates where she turned them so the pattern lined up around the whole table, and I have never gotten it right, and I do it anyway. The turkey went into the middle of it, in the black plastic tray from the store, with the film pulled back off the top. Nobody moved it onto a platter. I want to be fair here. Nobody was hungry, and I had not asked anyone to be. My daughter did not sit down. She took her coat off and put it over the back of a chair and got the roll of tape out of her bag and a fine point pen, and she started in the dining room. The tape was that blue kind painters use, and she tore the pieces about 2 inches long, and she wrote on each one before she stuck it down. Her printing is very small and very square. She has had that hand since she was 11. She put one on the dining table. It said, "Sell." She put one on the china cabinet we bought in London on the only trip we ever took that was not for work, in 1988, when Eliana was 34 and we ate nothing but bread for 4 days to afford the shipping. That one said sell too. She was not tearing through the place. I want that understood because it would be easier to tell you if she had been. She went room to room the way an estimator goes room to room. She made a decision, she wrote it down, she moved on. It took her a little under 2 hours, and she never once raised her voice or dropped a thing. And when she was done, there was a piece of blue tape on almost everything my wife ever touched. Lucian went behind her with a tablet. He was running some kind of inventory application, and he photographed each tagged item and typed a line about it. And Macy told me later he had the whole thing exported to a spreadsheet before they got home that night. Twice he stopped and asked me a question. The first time, he held up a chipped enamel roasting pan and asked whether that was something I used, and when I said it was the only thing I own that fits a whole chicken, he took the tape off it and put the tape in his pocket and typed something, and that pan is in my kitchen right now. The second time he stood in the doorway of the front room, with his thumb marking his place on the screen, and said, "Mr. Fisher, is there anything in the house you want kept?" He said it plainly. He was not softening me up, and he was not testing me. He wanted a list so that the list could be correct. I told him the roasting pan, the plates, and the tin on the windowsill above the sink. He typed all three. And I have thought about that a great deal since, because I gave that man 3 items out of a whole life, and he wrote down every one of them, and not one of them was ever touched. It was Violet who came up out of the basement. She did not say anything about it. She came up the stairs and went past me into the kitchen and got a glass of water she did not drink and stood at the sink with her back to the room, and that is a thing her grandmother used to do, and my daughter did not notice because my daughter was in the hall. So I went down. The lamp was off. I turned it on. The tool bag under the bench had a piece of tape on the strap that said donate. The threading dies, in their case, donate. The torch set, donate. It was all correct. I have not used any of it in 3 years, and a young person could get a start out of every piece of it. And if you had asked me the week before, I would have told you to give the whole bench away. Then I looked at the vise. There was a strip of blue tape across the flat of the handle, laid down lengthwise, and it said, donate. And it was stuck directly over the letters, not next to them, over them. You could see the shape of the cut letters under the tape, where the adhesive had pulled down into the grooves. Walter Fisher, under 2 inches of blue in my daughter's small square printing. I did not touch it. I want to be exact about that because I have gone back over this 100 times, and that is what I did. I stood there with my hands at my sides, and I looked at my father's name with a piece of tape over it, the same way his thumb used to be, and then I turned off the lamp and went back up the stairs and sat down at the table with my family. Violet stood in the kitchen doorway with one shoulder against the frame and did not come in, which is what her grandmother used to do when she had a question she had already decided to ask. We had been at the table maybe 15 minutes. My daughter had gotten up to start the coffee, and I had gotten up because I do not like being the only one sitting, and Lucian was still in the front room with the tablet. Violet said, "Does that mean Grandpa has to move out of his house?" She did not say it to me. She said it to her mother's back, and she said it flat, without any weather in it, the way you read a number off a gauge. My daughter did not turn around. She said, "Nobody has to do anything, honey. This is a care plan." I want you to hear that phrase the way I heard it, standing 4 feet away with a dish towel in my hand. Care plan. 2 words that have never once in the history of this country been used by a person who was going to come over and cut your grass. Violet did not move out of the doorway. She said, "Okay, but is he moving?" And my daughter said, "We are looking at options that make sense for everybody, and there's nothing to worry about, and please do not talk to your grandfather about this because it upsets him." That last part was said in the kitchen of the man it upsets 6 feet from him, and I do not think she heard herself do it. That is the thing I have the hardest time explaining about my daughter. She was not being cruel. She had simply gotten to a place where I was a topic. Violet looked at her mother for a second. Then she went past both of us and out the back door without a coat, and I watched her through the window over the sink go all the way across the yard and stand at the fence with her arms crossed, looking at the neighbor's garage. The coffee maker started making the noise it makes. My daughter got 2 cups down. She did not ask me if I wanted one. She has known for 41 years that I want one. And then she saw the tin. It sits on the sill above the sink. Stegmeyer beer, from a brewery in Pennsylvania that has not made a can like that since before she was born, dented on one side, and the lid does not seat anymore. Eliana kept it there for 30 years, for the same reason people keep any tin, which is that it was there. Inside it is a spare key to a car we sold in 2011 and my wife's wedding ring. She took it down off the sill and worked the lid off with her thumbnail. She did not sneak up on it. She did not look at me first. She took the ring out and she held it up for a second at the window, the way you do with anything that has a stone in it, and then she put it on the middle finger of her right hand because it would not go on the other one. She said, "I keep meaning to have this sized." And then she said, "For Violet." Later, she was looking at her own hand when she said it. She turned it a little under the light over the sink, the low one Eliana liked, and she said it in a soft voice, and I believe she meant every word of it, and that is not the part that got me. Here is the part that got me. She had reached for the child's name, not the ring, not the value, not the sentiment. My granddaughter was standing out in the cold in the yard because nobody in this kitchen would give her a straight answer, and my daughter took a dead woman's ring off a windowsill and put my granddaughter's name on it in the same breath so that it would be a kind of thing instead of a taking of a thing. I set the dish towel down on the counter. I said, "Put it back." That is all I said. 3 words. I have not raised my voice at my daughter since she was 17 years old, and I'm not going to start at 69, and I did not raise it then. But the coffee maker was still going, and I heard my own voice come out under it, low, and I heard it hit her. She stopped with her hand still up. She looked at me, and something went across her face very fast, and it was not anger. I have spent a year trying to name it, and the closest I can get is that it was the look of somebody who has just been caught doing a thing they did not know they were doing. She took it off. She did not argue, and she did not explain, which for my daughter is the same as an apology and is the only kind she has. But she did not put it in the tin. She set it down on the counter on the laminate, about 2 inches from the tin, and she picked her coffee up and walked out of the kitchen with it. I stood there for a minute. Then I picked the ring up and put it back in the tin and worked the lid down as far as it goes, which is not all the way, and I set it on the sill. And I said out loud to nobody, Clause 7. My daughter said, "What?" from the hall. I said nothing. The turkey had been sitting in the middle of the table in its black plastic tray for 2 hours, and nobody had cut it. So I got up and cut it. You do not leave a bird sitting. It does not matter whose it is or how it got there or what anybody at the table thinks of anybody else at the table. You cut it and you put it on the plates. Violet came back in while I was doing that. Her hands were red, and she did not say where she had been, and nobody asked. She sat down in the chair she has sat in since she was 4 years old, and she ate, which I was grateful for. She had her sleeves pulled down over her knuckles, and she kept them that way through the whole meal, and she cleaned her plate, including the part I happen to know she does not like. Then my daughter came back from the front room with a folder under her arm, and she sat down, and she put 3 stapled packets on the table, 1 in front of me, 1 in front of Lucian, 1 in front of herself. There was not 1 in front of Violet. I noticed that, and I have never stopped noticing it, because Violet was 14 years old and sitting at the table, and the packet had her school in it. The heading was the same heading from the party: Transition and Founder Care Plan. Under it this time, it said Implementation Schedule, and then the quarters across the top of a grid, the way you would lay out a job. Item 1 was the place in Avon Lake. A tour the 2nd week of January. Deposit in February. Move in the 1st quarter ahead of the spring because she said moving a person in winter is harder on them. The brochure was clipped to the back again, and it had been folded again so that the sunroom came up first, and I want to tell you that the sunroom is genuinely very nice. That is not sarcasm. I have been out there since. It is a good building full of decent people, and I would not have hated it. Item 2 was the yard. The language on the page said rationalize the Elyria Avenue occupancy under a single long-term instrument. She read that out loud, and then she translated it for the table. She said we were paying rent on a handshake, and that no bank likes a handshake, and that bringing it under one long-term instrument would clean up the balance sheet before the next bonding review. Item 3 was the name. Legal name change filed in the 1st quarter ahead of round 2 of the school district bid in April, so the new mark would be on the trucks and the letterhead before the walkthrough. She used the word transition 4 times in 11 minutes. I know because I counted. And I counted because I have spent my whole life in a trade where a man tells you what he is going to do to a building in words that describe what he is going to do to the building. Demolition is called demolition. She never once used the word sell. Not about the house, not about the yard, not about anything. It is a discipline, and it is not an accident, and she has had it since she was a girl. Somewhere in the middle of item 3, she stopped and said, "Oh, and did you like the plaque?" She said she had it made at the shop on Broadway, the one 2 doors down from Dion's Stairs, and that they do nice work. I said it was very nice. That is what I said. I want you to have that because people ask me later why I did not just say something at the table like a normal person, and the answer is that my daughter had ordered a piece of brass with a dash on it, and she genuinely did not know what she had ordered. She had typed the years into a form. Somebody in a shop had set the type, and if I had turned it over and put it in front of her at that table on that day, in front of her husband and her daughter, then, whatever happened next between the two of us would have started with her being humiliated. That was the one card I was never going to play, not because I am a good man, because you cannot get anything back from a person after you have done that to them. Lucian had not said a word since we sat down. He was on item 2. I watched him go back a page and read it again, and then go back once more, and he put his finger on the line about the single, long-term instrument and held it there. He has a way of getting very still when he is doing arithmetic. Then he looked up. Not at my daughter, at me. He said the Elyria Avenue lease. That is month to month. He said it flat, the way you read a gauge that is not where it should be. He did not say it like an accusation, and he did not say it like a warning. He said it like a man checking a number he already knew out loud in front of the person who could confirm it. My daughter answered before I could. She did not even look up from the packet. She said, "It is family. It is fine." And Lucian took his finger off the page. I set my fork down on the edge of my plate. I said, "You do not need a long-term instrument on Elyria Avenue." My daughter looked up from the packet for the first time in 20 minutes and asked me what that was supposed to mean. I said I signed papers on it last Tuesday. Land and building both to a development outfit out of Avon. Cash as is, no inspection. It closes Monday. Now I'm going to stop and tell you that this was a lie. I had not sold that ground, and I was never going to sell that ground. I want it on the record here and not later, because the whole rest of this depends on you knowing when I was telling the truth and when I was not. I lied at that table on purpose. I had spent 19 days trying to find out what was actually underneath all that careful language, and there is only one way I have ever known to find out what a thing is made of, which is to take the load off it and see what stands up. Lucian got there first. It took him about 3 seconds. He did not say anything. He closed the packet, squared it, and set both hands flat on top of it, and his face did not change at all. Which by then I had learned is exactly what he looks like when something has gone badly wrong. He was not thinking about me. He was thinking about a company with no shop, no yard, no racks, and no pipe threader 12 days before a progress payment. My daughter got there second, and she got there the way people get there when they have been reading a grid. She said, "Sold to who?" I said, "A company." She said, "Which company, Dad?" I said, "It closes Monday." She asked me what happens to the shop. I told her the machinery goes to auction and that the threader is bolted to a slab I will not own on Tuesday, so somebody is going to have to come cut the bolts. She asked about the racks. I said the racks are welded to the building. Then she asked about the hand tools and the bench and the dies, because she had been down those stairs 3 hours earlier with a roll of tape. I told her the truth on that one. I said they went to the County Joint Vocational School, all of it, and that a man from the program came with a van on Wednesday and took the bag, the dies, the torch set, and about 900 pounds of the rest of it, and that it is already gone. I said they will use it where Violet goes. Violet looked up. She had not looked up in a while. She did not say anything, but she stopped eating and she put her fork down on her plate very carefully, the way you set down something in a room where a baby is asleep. My daughter said, "And Mom's things." I said the tin stays on the sill. She said, "That is not what I asked." I said, "I know." I said the tin is not on a list. It is not going to be on a list. There is no version of any of this where it is on a list. She stood up. She said it in a level voice, with her hand still on the back of her chair. She said, "I am going to have somebody evaluate your capacity." I have thought about that sentence more than any other sentence anybody said to me that year. Not because it was the cruelest, it was not. But it was the only thing my daughter said out loud in 3 months that could be written down on a page and read back in a room full of strangers, and she said it in her own kitchen in front of her husband and her child because I would not tell her the name of a buyer that did not exist. I did not answer her. I got up and went into the front hall and opened the door. The storm door has a bad closer, and it swung out on its own and banged once against the rail. It was going dark already at 4 o'clock, the way it does here in November, and the cold came up the hall along the floor and behind me in the kitchen. The coffee maker was still going through its cycle, hissing on the last of the pot. I stood there with my hand on the edge of the door, and I held it open. Nobody said anything. Somebody's chair scraped. They got their coats. Lucian stopped in the doorway with his keys already out, and he said, "Mr. Fisher." And then he did not say anything else, and he went down the steps. My daughter went past me without looking at me, and she was already on her phone. Violet came last. She stopped on the mat and she looked up at me, and she had that same flat, gauge-reading face her grandmother had, and she said, "Bye, Grandpa." That is the whole thing she said. I said, "Bye, kiddo." Then she went out and I shut the door and I stood there with my hand on it until I heard the car back down the drive. The house does a thing after people leave it. Everybody knows what I mean. I went back into the kitchen and turned off the coffee maker and poured what was left down the sink. I picked up the tin and worked the lid down as far as it goes, which is not all the way, and I put it back on the sill. And I said Monday. Macy Mesa signed for it at 9:15 on Monday morning. She remembers the time because the carrier was early and she had not gotten her coat off yet. It was certified mail with the green card on the back, and she told me she carried it down the hall with both hands and that she was in a good mood about it. Everybody in that office had spent the whole weekend talking about the sale of the yard. She thought she was carrying the land contract. Macy grew up 2 streets over from the shop. Her father ran pipe for me for about 4 years starting in 2003, and then he went over to the refinery for the insurance, and he died in 2019. She has never made anything out of that. She mentioned it to me exactly 1 time in a hallway years ago, and then never again. I am telling you now because it matters later, and because she would not tell you herself. My daughter was on the phone when Macy came in. She was talking to somebody at the school district about the December draw, and she put her hand out for the envelope without looking up, and Macy set it on the desk and went back to the front. About 90 seconds later, my daughter came out of her office with the envelope in her hand and asked Macy what time it had come. There were 2 documents in it. The first one was a certified copy of a 2-page form filed with the state of Ohio. Withdrawal of qualifying individual Fisher Mechanical Incorporated. Signature of the licensed individual notarized, and in the upper right corner the box where the state puts its own stamp when it takes a thing in. The stamp was dated the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I told you back at that dinner that there was one thing I had done in those 19 days that I was not going to tell you about until the day they found out. This is the day. That Wednesday morning I drove down to Broadway and went up those stairs and told Dion Woods to date it and file it, and he opened the safe and took it out and filled in the line and had it in the mail before 10 o'clock. Then I went to the grocery store and I gave the good plates out of the cabinet a wash, and the next afternoon I sat at my own table and let my daughter put blue tape on my wife's furniture, and I held the door open for her on the way out. I am not going to soften that for you. I had already done it. Everything that happened at that table happened after. The reason nobody knew for 4 days is the holiday. The state took it in on Wednesday, and Thursday and Friday the offices were dark, and the public license database does not update on a weekend. It flipped over sometime early Monday morning while the trucks were loading out of the yard. Suspended. Not revoked, not pending, not under review. There is one word on that screen, and the word is suspended. And every general contractor and bonding agent and building department in this state can pull it up on a phone. The second document was 1 paragraph long. Notice of termination of a month-to-month tenancy, Elyria Avenue, 30 days, signed by the owner of record. Macy said my daughter read both of them standing up in the hallway and then went back into her office and shut the door, which she never does, and called the state. She got a clerk in the licensing section in Columbus. Macy could hear her end of it through the wall. She heard her ask whether a withdrawal could be rescinded by the company, and then a long stretch of nothing, and then she heard her ask the clerk to read the date back to her. Then she asked her to read it back one more time. Then she said thank you, which Macy said was the part that scared her. Lucian came down the hall and stood in the doorway of her office. He did not go in. He had his phone in his hand, and it was already lit up, and Macy said he stood there in the doorway for a while, looking at my daughter, and my daughter was looking at the two pieces of paper on the desk, and neither one of them said anything to the other one. I want to be fair to my daughter here, because this is the place where it would be easy not to be. She did not scream. She did not throw anything. She did not call me. She sat down at her desk and pulled a legal pad over and started writing a list, and the first thing on the list was the 22 names. And Macy saw it later that day and told me every one of the 22 was on there in the order they were hired. That is who my daughter is. That is the whole problem. At 9:48, her phone went off on the desk, and it was Turner Fry. She let it ring twice. Macy was in the doorway by then with a question about something else, and she stopped asking it because they could both see the name on the screen, and Turner Fry does not call anybody at 9 in the morning unless something is wrong on a job site. My daughter picked it up and said, "Good morning, Turner." And Turner Fry said, "Why did the state just call me? My daughter called me at 2 minutes after 4 that afternoon. I had been sitting in the kitchen since 9 because I know what time the mail runs on Elyria Avenue, and I had been sitting there for 7 hours doing nothing at all." I let it ring 4 times. I want to be honest about why. It was not to make her wait. It was that I needed those 4 rings, and if I had picked it up on the first one, I would not have been ready, and there was going to be exactly one version of this conversation. She did not say hello. She said, "Is it reversible?" I said no. She asked if the company could file something. I told her the company cannot file anything because the company is not the license holder, and that a withdrawal by the qualifying individual is not an application, it is a fact, and the state does not take arguments about facts over the phone. She said, "Will you call them?" I said they will not put me through. I am the man who withdrew. There was a stretch of quiet on the line. I could hear the office behind her. Somebody was moving a filing box. Then she said, "What do you want?" And she started listing it the way she lists everything. She said, "Do you want your name back on the trucks? Do you want the plan pulled? Do you want an apology? Because I will give you one right now. I will say whatever you need me to say. Do you want to stay in the house? Because nobody was ever going to make you leave the house, Dad." I said I do not want anything. I have thought about that sentence for a year. It was true, and it was the worst thing I could have said to her, and I understood both of those things at the same time and said it anyway. Because if I had wanted something, she could have gotten it. That is the one thing my daughter has always been able to do. Tell her what it costs, and she will find it. A man who wants something is a man you can work with. What I handed her at 2 minutes after 4 on a Monday afternoon was a bill with no number on it. She was quiet again. Longer this time. Then she said, "You have never once asked me what I built." I did not know what to do with that. I am telling you the truth. I heard it and I filed it somewhere, and I did not understand one word of it until a year later in a room I will get to. I said the notice runs 30 days from today, and I hung up. The rest of this I got from Nolan Torres, standing in my driveway 2 days after with the truck still running. They were loading out at 6:40 the next morning. It gets light here around 7:20 in December, so the whole yard was still working under the pole lights, and the crew was staging on the east lot of the high school because the second-floor mains were going in that week, and the pipe had to be up before the drywall. 22 men. Nolan counted them later when he was telling me, and then he counted them again because he wanted to be sure he had it right. The state car came in the gate at 6:50. Kaylani Grant has been the inspector for this district for 11 years, and I have known her the whole time, and she is the kind of person who will fail you on a Friday afternoon and then stand in the rain for 20 minutes explaining exactly how to make it pass. She got out with a clipboard and a staple gun. She went to Nolan first because he was the one in the vest, and she asked him if the foreman was on site, and he told her he was the foreman. Then she did the thing she always does. She read the regulation number out loud. The whole thing, the chapter and the section and the subsection off the paper in a flat voice, standing in the cold with her breath going. Nolan told me she does it on every single stop work order she has ever posted, and that he has watched her do it 4 times in 11 years, and that he had never once thought about why. He thinks now that she does it so nobody in the yard can ever say she came out there and made something up. Then she asked him to move the men back from the fence line. She stapled it at chest height on the chain link by the gate. 4 staples, 1 in each corner, and she smoothed it flat with the side of her hand so the wind would not get under it. It is orange. You can read it from the road. Nobody said anything. Nolan said that was the part he could not get over afterward, that 22 grown men stood in a gravel lot in the dark under the pole lights and not one of them made a sound, and that Reese Strong was holding a length of 2 inch and did not put it down for a full minute because nobody had told him to. And the whole time, on the fence 8 feet to the left of that orange paper, was our sign. 4-foot panel, blue background, white block letters zip-tied to the chain link the way it had been zip-tied to 100 fences since 2000. It still said Fisher Mechanical. Nolan read it out loud to them. He did not have to. He climbed up on the back step of the stake truck so they could all see him, and he read the whole orange sheet from top to bottom in the dark. He told me later that he did it because the type on those things is small and the pole lights are behind you, and because about 8 of those men would have stood there and pretended they had read it rather than admit they could not. He has been running crews for 19 years. He knows exactly who those 8 are, and he has never once said their names to anybody, including me. Then he put it in plain language. He said no work goes in under this permit until the license is back. He said secure what is open, cap the risers, get the torches off the deck. He said you are getting paid for today. He said that last part before anybody asked, which is the whole reason those men would go into a fire for him. Reese Strong asked what it meant. Nolan told me he thought about lying for about a second and a half. Then he said, "Kid, it means we do not know." And Reese said, "Okay," and went and capped the risers. He was 19 years old, and he had a 4-week-old at home, and he did not ask a second question. Nasir Carrillo did not ask anything. Nolan said Nasir had his tools in his truck before Kaylani Grant finished reading the section number out loud. Not hurrying, not slamming anything. He put his bag in the bed, and he put his hard hat in on top of the bag, and he got in the cab and sat there with the engine off for a minute, and then he backed out and went home. Nolan told me about that in my driveway 2 days later, and he could not explain it. He said Nasir has never left a site early in 24 years, boss. He said it 3 times. It was 11 days before either one of us found out why. And when Nolan did find out, the first thing he said to me before he said anything about the money or the union or my daughter was, he already knew. He said it about a man walking to a truck. He had been carrying that picture around for 11 days without a caption on it. The news truck was there for something else. The district was 2 weeks out from a bond levy, and somebody had sent a photographer for footage of the new gym. He had his camera up on the fence before 7, and he shot about 40 seconds of the orange paper and about a minute of men carrying pipe back to the racks, and it ran that night at 6 between the weather and a story about a water main. My daughter got there at 7:20. She did not come in the gate. She parked her truck on the shoulder outside the fence, nose in, and she stayed in it. Nolan could see her from where he was standing. He said he waited for her to get out for a while and then stopped waiting. Her phone went off 11 times. Nolan counted the same way he counted the men. He said you could see the screen light up the inside of the cab every time and that she looked at it each time and did not touch it. Then she got a tissue out of the console and started wiping the inside of the windshield. She did the driver's side first, and then she leaned over and did the passenger side, and then she did the strip along the bottom where the defroster vents are, and then she got a second tissue and went back and did the corners. Nolan said she was doing it properly. That is the word he used. He said she was doing it right, corners and all, the way you would if you meant it. 4 minutes. The photographer got about 6 seconds of it because his camera was pointed that direction while he was changing something on it, and those 6 seconds ran on the 6 o'clock with no words on top of them because there was nothing to say about a woman cleaning a windshield. Turner Fry came at 8. He did not go into the office, and he did not shut off his truck. He pulled up nose to nose with hers on the shoulder and got out with a folder, and he laid the folder on the hood of his own pickup out in the open, in front of the gate with men walking past on the other side of the fence. It was 2 pages. Termination for cause under the licensure provision. He did not raise his voice, and he did not lecture her. Nolan said he heard Turner say one whole sentence the entire time, and the sentence was, "I have got 140 units of ductwork coming Thursday." My daughter read both pages standing in the cold with her coat open. Then she took the pen he was holding out and signed it on the hood of his truck. He picked it up and squared it and put it back in the folder. And he did not shake her hand. He got in and pulled out and went south on Broadway, and Nolan said that was the part the men noticed. Not the orange paper, not the state car, 22 of them standing behind a chain-link fence watching a general contractor decline to shake the hand of the person who signs their checks. The surety called before that piece ever ran on the 6 o'clock. They did not need the news. A termination for cause on a bonded public job posts to a clearinghouse the same day, and there are people in Hartford whose entire job is to watch that screen. A bond is not insurance. People get that wrong. When the surety pays out on the job, it does not eat the loss. It pays the owner, and then it turns around and collects from whoever signed the indemnity. And on that job, the indemnity had one natural person on it, me. They sent a demand for collateral. 5 business days, $600,000 secured, or they would begin exercising rights under the agreement. I got a copy at the house because my name is on the paper, and my daughter got the original at the office, and neither of us called the other one about it. The bank went the same afternoon. There is a covenant in that note that says the borrower shall maintain licensure in good standing, and a covenant is not a suggestion. The line of credit went from 90 days of breathing room to 0 between lunch and close of business. That is the one that kills a contractor, not the bond and not the lawsuit. Payroll runs on a line, and on Friday, there are 22 men who expect a number to appear in an account. By Wednesday, there were adhesive tags on the windshields of 9 trucks, orange about the size of a playing card, one on each. They put them on in the yard on my gravel, inside a fence I still owned for another 26 days. I want to say clearly that my daughter did not tell me any of this. I learned all of it from 3 other people over about 8 days, and every one of them assumed I already knew, and I let every one of them go on assuming it. The folder came in on Thursday. Dion called me at 7 in the morning again, which is his way of telling me something has changed. And when I got up there, he had his laptop turned around on the desk, which he has done maybe twice in 40 years. Macy Meza had sent it to him. Not to my daughter, not to me. To my lawyer whose name and address she had gotten out of the old corporate book in the file room on her own on a Wednesday night from her home computer. It was 18 months of documents. But it was not the documents I had seen in his office. It was the other half of them. Every single time Lucian Medina had asked her to pull the word Fisher out of something, Macy had saved a copy of the file first, before the edit, dated named in a folder on her own drive. Proposals, the insurance certificates, the employee handbook, board consents, a letter to the bonding agent from last spring, 200 and some files going back a year and a half. Dion asked her the obvious question in an email that night, and she answered it in one line and did not elaborate, and he printed the line out and handed it to me because he knew I would want it on paper. She wrote, "My dad worked for Mr. Fisher, and you do not erase people's names." That is all. No theory about what was going on, no accusation. She had not been building a case for a year and a half. She had been doing what she thought a person in a front office does, which is keep the record, and she had kept it against a day she did not believe was coming. I asked Dion whether we could use any of it. He said it is her work product on the company's system, so somebody will make an argument about it. Then he took his glasses off and said, "But I would rather have the question than not have it." Nolan called me that night at about 9. I knew what it was going to be before I picked up, and I picked up on the first ring, which is the opposite of what I had done with my daughter, and I have thought about that too. He did not lead into it. He said, "Boss, did you know this was coming?" I could have explained it. All of it was right there. The affidavit signed while I was on oxygen, the dash on the plaque, the blue tape over my father's name. 6 of his own men reclassified at 31% by people he had eaten Christmas dinner with. Every single piece of it was true, and every single piece of it was available to me in that moment, and any one of them would have bought me something. I said yes. That is all I said. I did not put anything after it. Whatever a man deserves out of me on a night like that, it is not a speech about how justified I am. He was quiet. I counted it. 3 seconds. Then he said, "Then I guess you had a reason." And he said good night, and he hung up. And I sat down at the kitchen table in the dark with the phone in my hand. I want to tell you what I wanted because it took me most of that night to work it out. I wanted him to yell at me. I wanted him to say something I could argue with. Nolan Torres has known me for 31 years, and he handed me the benefit of the doubt in 8 words free without asking me for one detail, and there is no way to put that down. You cannot set it on a table, you cannot pay it back, you just carry it. The 30th day was the 31st of December. I did not plan that. The notice ran 30 days from the Monday it was served, and that is where 30 days landed, and I did not put it together until much later that the reclassification my daughter had approved took effect the following morning, the 1st of January. 6 men were going to wake up on New Year's Day making 31% less, and I was going to put a chain on the gate the night before, and neither one of those things had anything to do with the other one. And both of them had my family's name on them. They moved out on the 28th, Macy told me. They took a bay off Lowell Street in Elyria on a short lease, 2,000 square feet, no yard, no crane. Nolan and 4 guys did it in a day and a half with a rented box truck. They got the racks apart, they got the hand stock and the fittings out, and they left the pipe threader where it was because it is bolted through the slab and it weighs 1,100 pounds and there was no money to hire a rigger. So on the morning of the 31st, there was a shop with a threader in it and nothing else, and the yard with nothing in it at all. I got there at 6. It was doing that wet snow we get off the lake, the kind that does not stick to anything but does not stop either. And the sodium light over the gate was still on because the timer is on the building, and the building was still mine. I had bought the chain the day before at the hardware on Broadway, 3 doors down from Dion's stairs. 5 feet of 3/8 and a lock. The kid at the counter asked me if I wanted it cut to length, and I said no, 5 feet is fine. And he cut it anyway because that is what he had been told to do with chain, and it came out at 4'10", and it was still fine. I ran it through the gate frame and around the post twice. Then I got the wrench out of the truck. I want to be careful about how I say this next part because I have heard people tell it back to me wrong. I did not need the wrench. A chain and a lock do not require a 24-inch pipe wrench. You loop it and you shut the lock and you are done in 4 seconds. But there is a way to pull a chain up tight before you set the lock so that there is no slack in it and nobody can get a bar in there and work it. You take a turn of it around the jaw and you lean back. And I have done it that way since I was 22 years old on 100 gates because that is how Walter Fisher did it. So I did it that way. I set the jaw and I took a turn and I leaned back on it until the chain came up hard against the post and I shut the lock and I put the wrench back in the truck. Nobody was there. That is the whole thing I remember about it. My ground, my lease, my lock, and nobody in that yard to see it, and the sodium light going and the snow coming sideways through it. The bracket for the sign is still on the gate. 2-inch angle 4 holes drilled in the year 2000. I hung the first one on it myself. Eliana held the ladder, which she did not need to do, and which I did not tell her not to do, and it was August and the gravel was hot enough to come up through your boots. I was 44 years old. I had 4 men. The panel was blue with white block letters and I zip-tied it at 4 corners and stood back in the road to see if it was straight, and she said it was straight, and it was not, and she knew it was not. They had taken the sign down when they moved out. Cut the ties. 4 black stubs still in the holes. I got in the truck and I drove out, and I got about 2 blocks down past the tire place, and I pulled over. I want to tell you I went home. I have told a few people that I went home. What I actually did was sit on the shoulder on Elyria Avenue in a running truck for an hour and 10 minutes with the wipers going every so often, doing nothing. I turned the radio on and turned it off again. I ate a roll of mints out of the door pocket. At one point, I got out and wiped the snow off both mirrors with my sleeve, the driver's side and then the other side, and got back in. There was no reason to do it. The snow was not sticking to anything. At about 7:20, her truck went past me. She did not see me. There was no reason for her to look. She had her hands at the top of the wheel the way she has driven since she was 16. And she went by at about 25 miles an hour and put her blinker on 200 feet early the way she always does. Lucian was in the passenger seat. He was looking at his phone. I watched them slow at the gate and stop. The brake lights stayed on. Nobody got out for a while. My daughter told me this part almost a year later in the shop while we were waiting on the glue to set up on a run of 40-inch duct. Neither one of us was looking at the other one. That is the only reason it got set at all. They sat at the gate for a few minutes. Lucian did not say anything about the chain. He did not get out and look at it, and he did not ask her whose lock it was because he had already worked out whose lock it was on the drive over. He turned the tablet around on his knee and showed her a document. It was a buy-sell agreement among the shareholders of Fisher Mechanical Incorporated, executed in 2019. She recognized it before he got to the second page because she wrote it. She wrote it 4 months after her mother died. That was the year she reorganized everything, the year she put the whole company on a real footing, and she did it because she had just watched what happens to a family when nobody has thought about the paperwork ahead of time. She was 35 years old, and she sat at her mother's dining room table with a legal pad and drafted the bones of it herself before she handed it to a lawyer, and the lawyer told her it was good. She told me there were still casserole dishes on that table while she was writing it. People had been bringing food for 3 weeks, and nobody could keep track of whose dish was whose, so they were stacked at the far end with a strip of tape on each lid and a name on the tape in marker. She worked around them for 2 nights. When she was done, she washed every one of them and drove them back around town herself. There is a paragraph in it about trigger events. If a shareholder dies or is declared incapacitated, or if the corporation loses its operating license, then the remaining shareholders may purchase that shareholder's interest at book value on 30 days' notice. She wrote that paragraph with me in mind. She will tell you that straight out. She had a 63-year-old father whose name the entire company hung on, and who had just buried his wife and gone quiet, and she wanted a mechanism in place so that if something happened to me, the business would not stop moving. That is what she thought she was building. Lucian read the number for book value off the screen. She told me the number, and I am not going to put it here because it is small enough that it would sound like a joke, and it is not a joke. It was small because everything that company was actually worth was goodwill and bonding capacity, and both of those had gone off a cliff in 9 days. He said, "I would rather do this quietly." She said, "How long have you had that pulled up?" He did not answer that either. He has a way of letting a question sit there until it stops being a question. And then she asked him. She said, "Did you ever love me?" Here is where I want to be careful, because when she told me this, she was very matter-of-fact about it, and I do not think I could have been. He did not say yes, and he did not say no, and he did not get angry. He said he had thought about that one before, because he expected it would come up eventually. He said the honest answer was that he had never been able to tell the difference between loving her and admiring the way she ran things, and that he had decided a long time ago that it did not particularly matter which one it was. And then he said, "Because I have behaved the same either way." She told me she sat there and thought about it and could not find the lie in it. That is what she said. "I could not find the lie in it, Dad." She said, "Okay." He got out of the truck with the tablet under his arm and shut the door, normally not hard, and walked across the lot to where his car was, and he did not look back at her, and he did not look at the gate. She sat there with the engine running for a while. Then she called me. I was 2 blocks away. I want that in the record exactly like that, with no explanation stuck to the front of it. I was 2 blocks away on the shoulder past the tire place in a warm truck, and I had been sitting there for an hour and a half, and when her name came up on the screen, I picked the phone up off the seat and turned it face down on the console. I did not have a reason. I have gone looking for one, and there is not one there. I could tell you I thought she needed to get to the bottom before anything I said would hold. I have said that out loud to people, and they nod, and it is a real thing, and it is not why I did it. I turned the phone over because I did not know what I would sound like, and I was 69 years old, and I was afraid of how I would sound to my own daughter. It rang 11 times and stopped. Then it started again about 4 seconds later, and I turned it over to shut it off, and it was not her. It was Violet. I answered that one. I picked it up on the second ring, and I want you to notice what that says about me, because I noticed it about 4 seconds later, and I have not been able to stop noticing it since. She said, "Hi, Grandpa." Then she said, "Sorry." That is the order it came in. "Hi, Grandpa, sorry." I could hear a television going somewhere behind her, and a door shut, and then the television was quieter, so she had moved. I asked her what she was sorry about. She said she withdrew from the program. She said it fast, the way you get a thing out before somebody can start being kind to you about it. She had gone into the office at the vocational school on the 22nd, the last day before break, and signed the form, and the counselor had asked her twice if she was sure, and she had said she was sure. I asked her why. I asked it slow. I have thought about that since, too, that I had the sense to slow down for a 14-year-old and not for a 41-year-old. She said the toolkit. First-year students supply their own. It is on a list they hand out in August. Hood jacket, gloves, a decent, grinder, boots that will not melt, and the school has a program with a supplier, and it comes to about $1,100. Her mother had told her in November that they would take care of it after the first of the year. Violet had been getting by on loaners out of the shop cage since September. She told me that part like it was nothing. She said the hood they let her use has a bad seal on one side, so you have to hold your head a certain way, and that she had gotten good at holding her head that way, and that Mr. Dwyer said her beads were coming along. Then, about a week before Christmas, her mother told her, not this year. Violet said her mother's voice did something when she said it. She could not tell me what. She said it just did something, Grandpa, and then she did not say anything else about it, and I did not push her because I know exactly what it did. And so do you. So she pulled out. She told me she did it before the January deadline on purpose, so the seat would go to somebody on the waiting list instead of sitting empty. And she said that part like it was the sensible part. And it is the sensible part, and she is 14 years old. Now I am going to tell you what I had. On the 14th of November in Dion Woods' office, I had executed a trust for that child. Tuition through the end of the program, and a separate line, its own paragraph, for a first-year tool allowance, $1,100. I did not pull that number out of the air. I called the school in November and asked a woman in the office what the list came to. It was 6 weeks old, and it was sitting there, and it covered the exact thing to the dollar, and I had it in my hand while she was talking. I did not tell her. I am not going to dress that up. I could have said one sentence on that phone call. It is, "Handled, kiddo, go back in on Monday and tell them you are staying." That is 19 words. I had them, and I did not use them. Here is the reason, and it is not a good one. If I paid for it, she was going to ask where the money came from. Not that week. But she is a bright kid, and she would have gotten there eventually, and the road from that toolkit back to a chain on a gate is a short one. Every version of that conversation ends with my granddaughter finding out what her grandfather did to her mother's company and finding out that he had the money set aside before he did it. So I sat there on the shoulder of Elyria Avenue, and I let a child tell me she had given up a seat in a welding program over $1,100, and I kept my mouth shut to protect myself. That is what it was. I have had a year to find a better word for it, and there is not one. I asked her what her mother said when she told her. There was a pause on the line. She said I did not tell her. And there it is. That is the shape of my family in one sentence. That child withdrew from a program she loved and then carried it around by herself for 9 days so her mother would not have to feel it. and her grandfather sat 2 blocks from her mother's truck with the phone face down. I said, "Do not sign anything else. That is what I came up with. Do not sign anything else and I will call you." She said, "Okay." She said, "Are you and Mom okay?" I said we were working on it. Then I sat in the truck until the windows went over and I could not see out of them. The 1st of January came and went. 6 men in that shop went back after the holiday and found out what they were making. I have never had the nerve to ask Nasir Carrillo how he found out or who told him, and I am not going to. And on the 8th of January, my daughter sued me. The mediation room on the 2nd floor of the Lorain County Courthouse has a table with a burn ring on it that somebody tried to sand out and made worse, and an air handler in the ceiling that comes on every 11 minutes and drowns out whoever is talking. There were 4 of us, my daughter and a lawyer named Axel Smith on one side, Dion and me on the other. Lucian Medina was not there. He was not a party, he was not a witness, and by the 22nd of January, he had been out of that company for 9 days. Nobody said his name for the first half hour. Axel Smith had a yellow pad in front of him with about 6 lines on it. I could see it from where I sat because the table is not wide. He tapped a pen against it the whole time, not fast, and he stopped tapping about 4 minutes in and never started again. He had filed 2 counts. The first one was undue influence over an elder. The theory was that a 70-year-old attorney with a 40-year relationship had steered a 69-year-old man into destroying his own family's business. The second was tortious interference with contract, and underneath both of them was the argument that the qualifier role had been ceremonial since I stepped off the tools in 2022, that I had not run a job or signed a submittal in 3 years, and that my name on that license was a courtesy. I want to tell you what it is like to sit in a room and hear yourself called an elder by a man your daughter is paying. Dion did not argue any of it. He did not respond to the ceremonial part at all, which I did not understand until later. He opened a clip and took out 3 pages and laid them across the table, one at a time face up, and turned them so they were right side up for Axel Smith and not for us. The first one was an email from March of 2016. My daughter to me. The state had changed the continuing education rule, and I had said something about letting the license lapse, and she had written me 4 paragraphs asking me not to. There is a line in the middle of it. She wrote, "Please do not do this. We cannot bid a single public job without your name, and you know it." The second one was a text message from August of 2021. Same subject, 5 years on. She wrote, "Your license is the only thing that lets us bid state work, so please just sign the renewal and I will handle the rest." Axel Smith read both of them. He did not look up between them. The third one was the Transition and Founder Care Plan, 1 page, 7 numbered clauses. Dion read Clause 7 out loud. The whole thing, all 4 sentences in that flat voice of his, and the air handler came on in the middle of it, and he stopped and waited, and then started the sentence over from the beginning. Then he turned the page 90 degrees and put his finger on the bottom corner. There was a notary seal on it, impressed not stamped, with the date written in beside it in a small square hand, and the commission number under that. Justice Stewart certified that copy at 9:40 on the night of my 25th anniversary party at a folding table in the back hall of the Slovak home, 40 feet from where my daughter was standing. That is what I had borrowed the stamp for. I had not known what any of it was going to be for. I want to be clear about that. I did not have a plan that night. I had a piece of paper that somebody had handed me in front of 120 people and a bad feeling that in about a month it was going to be described to me as something other than what it was. And I have spent 47 years in a trade where the man who kept the paper wins. Dion said one sentence about all 3 of them. He said you cannot spend a man's name for 25 years and then put it in writing that the name is not worth anything. Then he did the part that mattered more. He put a 4th sheet down and said for the record, Exhibits 1 and 2 were both deleted from the company server in October. We have them because the office manager saved a copy of every document she was told to remove the name from on her own initiative going back 18 months. Her name is Macy Meza. She will testify to how and when. Axel Smith closed the pad. He said one thing to my daughter, quietly, but the air handler had cycled off and the room small. He said, "You did not tell me about the first two." Then he put the pen in his shirt pocket and picked up his briefcase and walked out. And the door has a closer on it, so it did not even slam. My daughter sat there on her side of the table by herself. I stood up. Then I sat back down. Dion did not move. The air handler came on. There is a window in that room that looks out at the parking deck, and the light coming through it was the flat gray you get here in January, and somewhere down the hall a cart went by with a bad wheel on it. I stood up again. Then I sat back down again. 47 years of knowing exactly what to do next, and I could not work out how to walk 4 steps around the end of a table. Dion went out into the hall to get water out of the machine, which took him longer than getting water out of a machine takes, and by the time he came back I had the paper out of my coat. It was graph paper, green 1/4 inch, off a pad I have had since before she was born. I had written it 3 times at the kitchen table over 4 days, and thrown 2 of them in the burn barrel, and the one in my hand had my printing on both sides and 1 line crossed out. I slid it across. The top half was what I would do. Refile the qualifier registration within 24 hours, which puts the license back in good standing in 1 business day and makes every one of those 22 permits live again. Restore the lease on Elyria Avenue, same terms, month to month, same rent, effective the same day, and pledge the ground itself to the surety as collateral, so they would stand down on the $600,000. That last one was mine to give. It is 2.5 acres with a shop on it, and it is the only thing I own outright, and if that company had gone under afterward, I would have lost it. Dion had told me not to do it in exactly those words twice on 2 different days. The bottom half was 2 conditions. I read the first one out loud because she was not picking the paper up. Condition 1. She goes into the apprenticeship at Local 55. Not a certificate, not a night course, not a management track, the apprenticeship. Under Nolan Torres on the floor, logging real hours, the same as any 19-year-old, and when she has enough hours and passes the exam, her name goes on the license as qualifier, not 1 day before. She said how many hours? I said 10,000. She said over how long? I said 5 years 4 if she is quick, and then I said the only part of it I had rehearsed. I said in this state a company does not hold a license, a person does. Somebody has to be the person. It has been me for 25 years, and I am 69, and it cannot be me for much longer, and I would rather it be you than a man we hire out of Cleveland who does not care what is under the drywall. She did not flinch at any of that. I had expected her to. She picked up a pen off the table and wrote 10,000 in the margin of her own packet and underlined it twice, and then wrote a number under it that I found out later was her age at the end of it. And that is my daughter all the way down. Then I read the second one. Condition 2. Lucian Medina never holds a position, a share, or a signature in that company again. He walks away from the buy-sell entirely, in writing, permanently. And she is the one who puts it in front of him. She put the pen down. She said no. I started to explain about the trigger clause. She stopped me before I got 4 words in. She said, "I know what the clause says, Dad." I wrote? Then she said the thing I have carried around ever since. She said it quietly, and she did not cry, and she was looking straight at me across a table with a burn ring in it. She said, "You do not get to write my husband out of my life on a piece of graph paper. You can have the license, you can have the hours, you can put me on a floor with a 19-year-old, and I will go. But you are not putting your hand inside my marriage, and if that is the price, then keep the whole thing, and I will let it all go down." And she was right. I want to be plain about that because I have told this story to people who wanted me to be right, and I was not. I had sat at my kitchen table for 4 days writing that sheet, and I had gotten condition 1 exactly correct, and condition 2 exactly wrong 3 times in a row, and never once noticed. I thought I was cutting a bad piece out. What I had actually written down was a man deciding who his daughter is allowed to be married
to, and putting it on the same page as a business term and expecting her to sign both.
41 years old. 2 counts filed against me that morning. Her company in pieces, her name on a suspended license, her lawyer out in the parking deck. And she looked at the one thing left that was hers, and she would not trade it. I have never in my life been prouder of her than I was in that room. And I could not say so because saying so would have sounded like a tactic. So I did not argue with her. I did not take the paper back, and I did not soften it, and I did not tell her to think about it. I turned to Dion and I said, "Give me the folder." He had it under the clip the whole time. He had asked me in his office on Monday whether I intended to use it, and I had told him I hoped I would not have to, and he had said that is not an answer. Mac and I had not given him one. He put it on the table and slid it over. I set it down in front of my daughter, and I did not open it. She opened it herself. I did not do it for her, and I would not have wanted to. The thing on top was not about her husband. It was a trust instrument, 11 pages executed on the 14th of November. Beneficiary, Violet Ann Medina. Tuition at the County Joint Vocational School through the end of the program. And a separate paragraph its own line, first-year tool allowance, $1,100. She read the date first. People who work with paper always read the date first. Then she read the tool line, and she said the number out loud, and it did not sound like a number when she said it. She said, "When did you do this?" I said 4 days after the party. 6 weeks before any of the rest of it. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I did not have anything. I opened my mouth, and what came out was I did not want it to be a thing that got used. And even while it was coming out of me, I could hear that it was not an answer. It was a shape that answers come in. Then I had to tell her the other half because she did not know it, and she was going to find out that afternoon one way or the other. I said Violet withdrew from the program on the 22nd of December. She put the trust down on the table. I have watched my daughter take in a lot of bad information over the years, and she does it the same way every time, which is that she goes still and starts sorting. This was the only time I ever saw the sorting stop. She sat there with both hands flat on that table for about 10 seconds, and she did not sort anything. She said she did not tell me. I said she did not want you to have to say it twice. Dion let that sit for a while, longer than a lawyer would. Then he said there is more in there, and it is not mine and it is not his. He took out 3 things and laid them down. The first was a certificate of formation from the state of Delaware. Medina Mechanical Services, a limited liability company. Sole member, Lucian Medina. Filed 11 months before the anniversary party. 11 months. Not after the license went down. Not after the stop work order. Not after any of it. Filed in the winter of the year before while he was still fixing our payroll cycle so the men got paid 2 days earlier while he was renegotiating the health plan for all 22 of them while he sat at my kitchen table at Christmas. The second was a receipt from a family law firm in Westlake for an initial consultation. Time-stamped. It was stamped 1 hour and 4 minutes after Kaylani Grant stapled that orange paper to the fence. Not that night. Not that week. 1 hour. The third one was the renewal affidavit with my signature on it, the one filed while I was at Mercy, and beside it, Dion had put a handwritten note Lucian had given Macy Meza in the spring of last year about a filing deadline. 4 lines of ordinary handwriting on a sticky note. Both of them stood up straight and then fell off to the left at the end in the same place the same way. That is when the whole thing turned over on me. Everything I had done since the 8th of November, I had done believing I was taking something apart. I was not. There was already a machine running in that company, and it had been running for 11 months before I ever read that plaque, and it was going to finish with my daughter at book value and a quiet transfer, and it would have been done clean, and nobody would have been able to point at a single cruel sentence in the whole file. I did not save her. I want to be careful about that because it would be very easy to sit here and let you think I did. I did not know it was there. I put a chain on a gate for my own reasons, and it happened to jam a gear I could not see. I told her Condition 2 comes off the paper. I said I was wrong about it, and I said it in front of Dion so she would know it was not a maneuver. She said leave it on. She said not because you get to, because I did not know this an hour ago, and now I do. Then she asked Dion for a pen. Her own pen was on the table about 6 inches from her right hand. It had been there since she wrote 10,000 in the margin. Dion handed her his without a word, and she took it and signed both conditions and the top half of the sheet, and she initialed the crossed-out line.
I got up and went out into the hall and got a cup of water out of the machine and brought it back and set it down in front of her.
I have never done that in my life. Not once. It is Dion's thing. He has been doing it to people in that office for 40 years, and I have watched him do it 100 times and never once thought about doing it myself. She looked at the cup for a second and then said thank you. We came out into the corridor, and she stopped at the top of the stairs with her coat over her arm. She said, back in December, I told you that you have never asked me what I built. I said I remembered. She said, so ask me sometime. Then she said, and have an answer ready because I want to hear yours first. And I did not have one. Standing in that hallway, I did not have one single word. And it took me a year. A year later, my daughter has a weld scar about 1.25 inches long on the inside of her left forearm, and she does not put a sleeve over it. She got it in her 4th month in the shop on Elyria Avenue on a Tuesday in July off a piece of spatter that came down inside the cuff of her glove. Nolan wrote it up because he writes everything up. She was back on the floor in 40 minutes. She is a first-year apprentice in a crew of 6 under Nolan Torres. She hauls stock. She cleans the bay at the end of the day, which is the first year's job. She has 940 hours logged against 10,000, and she keeps the running number on a magnet on the side of the toolbox where everybody can see it, and she updates it herself every Friday. Nobody in that building calls her the chief executive officer, which she still is on paper. Reese Strong is still there. He is 20 now, and he cuts a good thread. His girl walks, and she came into the shop in October in a pair of ear protectors somebody had cut down for her, and there is a photograph of that on the wall by the time clock. 22 men are still 22 men. Nobody got laid off. I want to say that plainly because it is the only part of this whole thing I would put my name to without qualification. Now here is the part that was not in either condition on that piece of graph paper. The first thing my daughter did before she filed anything, before she called the union about her own apprenticeship, was pull the reclassification. She withdrew the petition, restored the 6 men to journeymen, and back-paid all of them for the 3 months they had already worked at the lower rate. It came to a number the company could not really afford in January, and she did it in January anyway. Nobody asked her to. It was not on my paper. She did it in the first week, and she never mentioned it to me, and I found out from Dominic Nicholson at the hall. Nasir Carrillo thanked her with a nod. Just a nod across the bay once. A year later, it is still a nod. That is all it is ever going to be, and she knows that, and she nods back. The plaque is on the wall in the shop office next to the safety board and the OSHA poster. Somebody hung it there when they moved back in, and nobody has ever taken it down or sent it out to be redone. 2000-2022 in half-inch letters 6 feet from the time clock, and I walk past it 4 mornings a week, and I stopped seeing it a long time ago. Macy Meza is still the office manager. Her screen still comes up with the name across the middle in block letters. Nobody ever told her to change it back because it never got changed. Violet went back into the program 3 weeks after she pulled out. The seat was still there because the waiting list had not moved. She has a hood of her own now, and a jacket, and a grinder, and boots, and she believes her mother paid for them. Her mother let her believe it. My daughter looked at that and made a decision inside of about 2 seconds, and I was standing right there when she did it, and I have never said one word about it to that child, and I never will. Lucian Medina lives in Charlotte. He runs a mechanical services company there with his name on it. I hear it is doing well. He has not asked about Violet. In February, we were waiting on glue to set up on a run of 40-inch duct, the 2 of us standing there with nothing to do for 11 minutes, and I asked her. I said, "What did you build?" She said, "You first." So I gave her the wrong answer because I had a year, and I still got it wrong on the first pass. I started in on revenue and head count and the bonding capacity 4 to 11 million, 4 men to 22, and she let me get about a minute into it, and then she said, "No." So I stood there, and I looked at the floor of a shop I have owned since 1999, and I said the true thing. I said you built the only version of it that does not need me. I said I built a company that ran on my name, and that is not a company that is a man with employees. If I had gone down those basement stairs wrong in March, I would have taken every one of them with me. You are the one who saw that. You started fixing it when you were 35 years old at your mother's dining room table, and you never once told me what you were doing, because every time you tried to tell me, I said you were good at paperwork. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said okay. Then she said the glue was set, and it was not. We work in the same building 5 days a week now. We talk about pressure drops and delivery windows and whether the kid is ready to be turned loose on a joint by himself. We have never once eaten a meal together. She calls me Dad. Everybody else in that shop calls me Mac, and she never has, not one time in her life. And I have thought about that more than I have thought about any of the rest of it. On Saturday afternoon, her daughter got her welding certificate. I got there 30 minutes early so I could have the back row. They told the class to bring their boxes up onto the stage, so she carried hers. When she set it down beside her, the lid came open about an inch. Inside, on top of the hood and gloves, is a 24-inch pipe wrench with a name cut into the flat of the handle. She has never asked how it got in there. From the back row, you cannot read the letters. You can only see that there are letters. At the house, the tin is still on the sill above the sink. The lid still does not seat. For most of my life, I believed the name on a piece of paper was proof that a man had been here. My father died without one, and I watched them put his tools in a bin, and I built a company around making sure that never happened to me again, and never once noticed I had built it so it could not stand without me in it. I still do not know what to call what I did. People call it a lesson. There was a Monday in December when my daughter called me twice from a parking lot, and I sat 2 blocks away and turned the phone over on the seat, and there is no version of that where I call it teaching. Some was teaching, some was walking away. Most fathers do both in the same week and only tell you about the first one. I am not going to tell you God took a hand in it. But I have been under enough buildings at 2 in the morning to know a man does not always see the shape of the thing he is standing inside of, and I believe God does. What I got out of that year was not a company and not my name back. It was 11 minutes waiting on glue to set and a scar somebody chose not to cover and a girl on a stage with a box at her feet. God willing, that is enough. So let me ask you, if you were 69 and the only thing holding your family's company upright was your own name and your family had just put it in writing that you were finished, would you pull it or let it stand? There is no clean answer. If this story got anywhere near you, tell me in the comments about the hardest thing you ever had to let somebody learn on their own. I read them. And if you want more stories like this one, stay with us here on the channel.